I'm now here from Stoddard.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I express my appreciation to the BMAF personnel for asking me to participate in this panel discussion. Having said that, I now want to share with you a tiny bit of the massive evidence that supports Mexico's Grijalva River as the most logical candidate for the Book of Mormon's River Sidon. Now, as I began my preparation for today, without any real forethought or hesitation, I sat at my computer and I keyed in the words for the title of my presentation very autocratically. The Grijalva River is the Book of Mormon's River Sidon. Well, in that respect, early in the 1990s, John and Janet Hilton did an extensive, on-the-ground analysis of the upper Grijalva River as the most promising candidate for the Book of Mormon's River Sidon. We can't replicate their research today because so much of the upper Grijalva is now underwater because of the dams on the river. The Hiltons say, and I quote, "The Book of Mormon's internal geographical descriptions do not produce a unique, complete geographical interpretation credible to most scholars. Textual ambiguity leads readers to quite different geographical models based on the assumptions each reader chooses to bring to the study of the text," unquote. Boy, does that fit today, folks. In other words, I think that's a valid explanation for the reasons we're holding this panel discussion today. Now, from a personal, and listen to me, tongue-in-cheek perspective, I think we're involved in this panel discussion today because Book of Mormon scholars primarily choose their geography model for one or more of several potential reasons. Now remember, I said tongue-in-cheek, okay? Oh, first, their model's based on the territory where they went on their missions. Second, their model is based on the sites where they do their archaeological digging. Or a third possible one, they continue to believe in the model explained in an outdated, out-of-print Book of Mormon geography book. Well, or their model is the one espoused by their friends or relatives. Or they're locked into their model because they've contributed serious financial backing to ensure its success. Well, they believe in their model because, now I like this one, folks. I'm biased, I know. They believe in their model because they've tromped all over Mesoamerica scores of times in attempting to equate Book of Mormon cities, valleys, lands, wilderness areas, rivers, and seas with potential Mesoamerican counterparts. Those are our tour directors. Or seventh, as a reflection of my situation, here I am, their model is the one reflected in the Book of Mormon geography books they've edited. And I'm tempted also to add another reason. Their model originated from quasi-hallucinatory thought processes. That is, they were probably smoking cedar bark when they dreamed it up. Now I confess, folks, I'm a substitute today. Somewhat at the last minute, I was asked to talk about the Grijalva River as the most logical candidate for the Book of Mormon's River Sidon. Now, note that I said I'm a substitute. I didn't say I'm a neophyte or a has-been. And I can confess to you I'm biased. Now, to everyone, and especially to my colleague on the panel, Joe Anderson, based on my many years of extensive research, I say very vocally that I believe unequivocally that the Grijalva River is the River Sidon. I obviously have opinions based on something more than mere heartburn that caused me to make that statement. And I assure you that I haven't been smoking cedar bark. Now, I recently forwarded an email to my friends and cronies about something called cowboy wisdom. One of my favorite pieces of cowboy wisdom seems to fit my situation today. Here it is. Don't interfere with something that ain't bothering you none. Now, until I was asked to be on the program, I was looking forward to following that advice via my non-participation today, so I could casually soak up the wisdom of the experts who supposedly know everything about the Book of Mormon's River Sidon. However, folks, I'm okay with the marching orders I received that go against that cowboy wisdom I cited. And in doing so, I am very honored to be part of this panel discussion today. Now, here's where I need to make several upfront statements. Several. I believe that the Book of Mormon is a real account about real people who lived in the New World geographic area we today refer to as Mesoamerica. I believe that Joseph Smith did exactly what he said he did. He translated the Book of Mormon by the gift and power of God. And I believe that everything we read in the Book of Mormon is there for a purpose. In that respect, I believe that Mormon included his extensive geographic pointers so we would know where in Mesoamerica the various New World events took place. That is, I believe Mormon wrote as if he had a map in front of him and as if he expected us to relate to that map throughout our reading. Now, further, I believe that we can identify with relative accuracy the primary geographic features of Mormon's map. Oh, you know, the narrow neck of land, the land northward, the land southward, the narrow strip of wilderness, the East Sea, the West Sea, and so forth. And yes, I believe we can identify correctly the location of the River Sidon if we follow Mormon's and Moroni's geographic pointers carefully, and if we're familiar enough with the geography, topography, archaeology, history, and cultures of Mesoamerica. So what can I tell you today about the River Sidon as you sit back and soak up the wisdom about the Grijalva and Usumacinta rivers as candidates for the River Sidon? Rest assured that one of them is the Sidon. In general, either of them meets many of the criteria for Sidon, but which one meets all the criteria? Now, to answer that question, I would need at least half an hour to explore each of several topics with you. Each of those topics is a valid criterion, not the one shown previously, but for Sidon, a valid criterion for use in identifying the Book of Mormon's River Sidon. Now, here are some of those criteria. Folks, don't have time to talk about them. Here they are quickly. We could, in looking choose between Grijalva and Usumacinta, we could explore the outcomes of the Limhi expedition's attempt to travel from the land of Nephi to the land of Zarahemla. The scholars generally agree that they must have gone down one of these rivers. Which one did they go down? Don't have time to talk about it. Or we could look at the population densities along the Grijalva and Usumacinta rivers during the pre-classic period. I thought Larry was going to throw a visual up here to show about the Usumacinta along with the one he showed about the Grijalva. Well, we could look at the existence or non-existence of villages and cities in the vicinity of both the Grijalva and Usumacinta rivers during the pre-classic period. Now, side comment to Dr. Jerry Ainsworth. Jerry, notice I've changed the wording here from along the banks of to in the vicinity of. Both expressions result in the same outcome. In that respect, Dr. Ainsworth, I contend that places like Palenque and El Mirador are not in the vicinity of the Usumacinta River. We could do a review of the topological features of both the Grijalva and Usumacinta rivers at elevations conducive to the location of the city of Zarahemla. Doesn't sound like it's all that far from the headwaters of the Sidon down to Manti, and then from there on down to the city of Zarahemla. We don't have time to explore that further. Here's an intriguing one. We could do an examination of the pottery trail from Kaminal-Huyu to the Chiapas Depression. That's like saying from the land of Nephi to the land of Zarahemla. Very intriguing research. Or we could look at the roles of cities such as Melech, Noah, and Ammonihah in helping to identify the river Sidon. For example, how did the Lamanites get into the city of Ammonihah to destroy it? I contend they got in through the back door. Well, that only fits with the Grijalva. Or we could look at the roles of Zarahemla's wilderness side and the day and a half's journey in helping to identify the river Sidon. We've seen a little bit about that from Larry. We could look at the outcomes of archaeological digs by the New World Archaeological Foundation in verifying that the Grijalva is the river Sidon. Now, folks, we cannot just put this research on the shelf. We paid for it with our tithing dollars years ago. The NWAF was funded, still is, by the church. And the research that they came out with was not addressed to members of the church, but to society in general. That research is still resident in the library at BYU. So much there that they did in terms of the Grijalva. We cannot just ignore it, folks, just because we say it's old and out of date. We could look at the distances associated with Sidon-related geographic features correlated with Grijalva-related geographic features. Interesting stuff. We could look at the overall geography of the Book of Mormon's land southward correlated with the territory immediately east and southeast of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. We could look at name correlations. Might be dangerous somewhat, but we could name correlations in the land southward that help identify the river Sidon. We could do an examination of potential candidates for the Limhi expedition's land among many waters in relation to the Grijalva and Usumacinta rivers. Where is that land among many waters if the Limhi expedition went down the Grijalva, pray tell? We could, a little clarification here, and I use this word intentionally, debunking of Dr. Rick Houck's contention that, and I quote him, the Grijalva theory is based on the correlation of the East Sea with the Gulf of Mexico, unquote. Rick, that's absolute nonsense. We could do an analysis. We could do an analysis of John and Janet Hilton's research about the Grijalva, frankly, without the influence of the invalid Nephite North, or what I also call John Sorenson's North, because their research is tainted with that in mind. We could do an analysis of the boundary comparisons of the modern Mexico states of Veracruz, Oaxaca, and Chiapas with the Book of Mormon lands of Desolation, Zarahemla, and Bountiful. Something is going on there. Now, folks, I believe that rigorous objective analyses of such criteria as those will lead the analyzer to the conclusion that the Grijalva River is the river Sidon of the Book of Mormon. I could add several other criteria. We've seen some from Larry here. However, I hope I made my point here that we have a mountain of evidence to analyze in determining whether the Book of Mormon's river Sidon is the Grijalva River or the Usumacinta River. I simply don't have time today to deal adequately with more than one topic at this point. That is more than one of such criteria in support of the Grijalva. Now, therefore, I'm going to share with you quickly my thoughts about the Book of Mormon's Wilderness of Her Mounts and its role in helping us locate the river Sidon. Bottom line, folks, I think I know where the Wilderness of Her Mounts was and is located. I'm biased, but I think I know this. I think it becomes pretty obvious. Now, trust me, it's located in the same place today where it was located in Book of Mormon times. After carefully studying the Book of Mormon, if we can locate the Wilderness of Her Mounts, I propose that we can easily and correctly locate the river Sidon. I maintain that by testing this one criterion, we can choose correctly between the Grijalva and Usumacinta rivers as the Book of Mormon's river Sidon. We don't need to examine the other criteria I just shared with you, let alone any criteria that our Usumacinta believers will share with you. So, in just the next few minutes, I'll explain why the Wilderness of Her Mounts provides what I think is impeccable evidence that the Grijalva River is the Book of Mormon's River Sidon. All right, to do that, I assume, well, we're going to go to the Book of Mormon, but I assume that everyone has read on several occasions about the Amlicites in Alma 2 and 3. Larry briefly referred to this. In brief, the Amlicites were former Nephites led by Amlici, who apparently wanted to be a king over all the people. And eventually, the Amlicites teamed up with the Lamanites and fought a great battle against the Nephites, I'm going to say, near the River Sidon, probably standing in the River Sidon while fording it at least, certainly on the banks of the River Sidon. Eventually, the Nephites overpowered the Amlicites and Lamanites and drove them from the Sidon to the wilderness area that was west and north of the land of Zarahemla. That's the wilderness of Hermounts, as named in the Book of Mormon. And in that wilderness, if we recall the story, the Nephites overpowered and killed the Amlicites and Lamanites. Little side note associated with these events, at least from my perspective, it's worth our time to watch Mel Gibson's movie, Apocalypto, if for no other reason than to help us envision and understand the chase scene of the Nephites pursuing the Amlicites and Lamanites into and in the wilderness of Hermounts. Now, using the Alma chapters 2 and 3 account, along with obviously some other Book of Mormon accounts, let me summarize information about the wilderness of Hermounts. Here we go. First, the wilderness of Hermounts must be directly associated with the Jaredite civilization, because in the days of King Lib, the Jaredites, quote, did preserve the land southward for a wilderness to get game, unquote. At least that portion of the land southward must be directly contiguous to the land northward where the Jaredites lived. Second, therefore, the wilderness of Hermounts must be located in relatively close proximity to the narrow neck of land. Third, part of the wilderness of Hermounts, and I quote, was infested by wild and ravenous beasts, unquote. Fourth, the Amlicites and Lamanites who were killed in the wilderness to the west and north of the city or land of Zarahemla, quote, were devoured by those wild and ravenous beasts and also the vultures of the air, unquote. Fifth, Hermounts, as verified in the Book of Mormon Index, is the wilderness that is, quote, west and north, unquote, of the city or land of Zarahemla. Sixth, we aren't told how far Hermounts was from the city of Zarahemla or the River Sidon. We also aren't told how many days the Nephites pursued the Amlicites and Lamanites west and north of Zarahemla into and in the wilderness of Hermounts. Now, we are told that Hermounts was away beyond the borders of the land, unquote, the land of Zarahemla. Now, away beyond sounds like more than a mere few hours travel time or more than a few miles distance from Zarahemla. At this point, whatever else we say about the wilderness of Hermounts, we must conclude that it was located in the land southward. Now, based on the archaeological and historical records of Mesoamerica in the land southward, that territory was and is Maya country, not only during Book of Mormon times, but also today. Therefore, seventh, at one point I assumed that the Maya country of Mesoamerica extended all the way west to the narrow neck of land, in this case the center point of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. Oh, that's nonsense, of course. All legitimate maps of Maya country show Maya country beginning a significant distance from the center of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, as you'll see in this visual. The green area is Maya country, during Book of Mormon times and today. Notice the territory between the Isthmus and the beginning of Maya country. Quite a chunk of territory there. Why isn't that territory included in Maya country? Answer: because the wilderness of Tehuantepec extends from the narrow neck of land, that is, the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, to the east and represents a significant chunk of uninhabited territory in the land northward. Only after the wilderness of Tehuantepec runs out or peters out on the east do we find evidence of definitive Maya occupation in the Book of Mormon's land southward. Associated with, now that's forever, associated with what is called the wilderness of Tehuantepec are the wilderness areas, modern names known as Ushpanapa and Chimalapa, as you'll see in this visual. Here's a significant thing about these wilderness areas. They've essentially been uninhabited by permanent cultures forever. Well, we've seen minor human occupation now and then in these wilderness areas, such as the native tribe that the Mexican government moved from Grijalva River territory to the Tehuantepec wilderness area when 3 dams were built along the Grijalva. But permanent human occupation over the centuries in the wilderness of Tehuantepec has been practically non-existent. So I invite you to note pointedly the location of the modern wilderness areas associated with the names Tehuantepec, Ushpanapa, and Chimalapa. The wilderness of these areas is precisely in the right location for the wilderness of her mounts. And here are 2 other significant things associated with the modern wilderness areas of Tehuantepec, Ushpanapa, and Chimalapa, and the Book of Mormon's wilderness of her mounts. First, the very name Tehuantepec, which means, depending on your source, wild beast, man-eating beast, hill of the fierce beasts, or wilderness of wild beasts, reflects meanings that are all but identical with the very essence of her mounts. That is, quote, her mounts was that part of the wilderness which was infested by wild and ravenous beasts, unquote. That Book of Mormon wording pointedly describes sections of the wilderness of Tehuantepec today. Further, her mounts is the area where the Amlicites and Lamanites who were killed there, quote, were devoured by those beasts and also by the vultures of the air, unquote. Even today, the vulture capital of the world. Now, Kirk, those are my words, okay? That's my description of the area, is located in the wilderness of Tehuantepec, a fact that is exemplified by the establishment of a national vulture preserve in the Tehuantepec wilderness territory by the Mexican government. Second, now, this gets pretty personal at this point. I think definitely that her mounts must be associated with the Jaredite civilization. And I, of course, equate the Jaredites with the Olmecs of Mesoamerica. Now, further, I have no doubts that Olmecs were found here and there throughout, now did you hear me? Throughout Mesoamerica during Book of Mormon times. However, I equate the Book of Mormon Jaredites with the Olmecs who lived in the what's called Olmec heartland, or the cradle of the Olmec civilization. That's in Veracruz and western Tabasco. Now listen, folks, personally, that impression is burned into my mind because of what I was taught last February at the Olmec conference sponsored by the DeYoung Museum in San Francisco. The world's foremost Olmec authorities who were on the program at this conference unanimously spoke of all Olmecs outside the Olmec heartland as living in the hinterlands of Mesoamerica. To me, they're the Jaredites, or the Olmecs, who probably, because of distances or other reasons, didn't gather at the hill Ramah for the last great battle of the Jaredites. Now, Okay, my time is moving along, and we're now to the crux of why we're having this panel discussion. So let's say that a Book of Mormon geography buff or scholar says to you that he or she believes the Usumacinta River in Mesoamerica is the river Sidon of the Book of Mormon, let alone to say that Yaxchilan is the city of Zarahemla, or well, whoever, whatever. Anyway, that means this Usumacinta believer must identify a legitimate wilderness of her mounts in conjunction with his or her Usumacinta candidate for the river Sidon. Strictly from the perspective of the wilderness of her mounts, what question should you logically ask the Usumacinta believer in response? I propose 7, and here they are. Maybe you want to write these questions down on your tablet and turn them in. No. 1, does your wilderness of her mounts adjoin the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, which is the only logical New World candidate for the Book of Mormon's narrow neck of land? 2, is your wilderness of her mounts on the eastern fringes of the heartland of the Jaredite or the Olmec culture? 3, is your wilderness of her mounts west and north of your city or land of Zarahemla? 4, is your wilderness of her mounts away beyond the borders of your land of Zarahemla? 5, can you identify in the vicinity of the Usumacinta River a logical, valid candidate for the city of Zarahemla, from which Nephites, Amlicites, and Lamanites could travel west in a reasonable period of time and reach the wilderness that adjoins the Isthmus of Tehuantepec? 6, can you associate wild and ravenous beasts of the forest and vultures of the air with your proposed wilderness of her mounts? 7, is the territory to the west of your land of Zarahemla such that warriors could indeed rapidly traverse that territory unimpeded by impassable topological or geological barriers and, within a relatively short time and distance, reach a wilderness area that is entered at some point west of Zarahemla and that also extends north of that point? Now, if your Usumacinta believer cannot answer yes to every one of those questions in association with the Usumacinta River, you can legitimately suggest that he or she start over by seeking answers to the questions from the perspective of the Grijalva River. If that suggestion is ignored, you can then legitimately suggest that the Usumacinta believer explore seriously and objectively the other criteria for the river Sidon. Now, as a quick summary as I conclude, I've shared with you, admittedly, my biased thinking about only one criterion for helping us choose between the Grijalva and Usumacinta rivers as the Book of Mormon's river Sidon. That criterion, the wilderness of her mounts, helps me to say, I believe unequivocally that the Grijalva River is the Book of Mormon's river Sidon. Now, thank you for your time and attention. I look forward to your questions and comments.